There is a particular kind of cognitive dissonance that defines the modern relationship with environmental pollution. Most people are aware, in a general sense, that the planet is in trouble. They read the headlines, acknowledge the concern, and then continue largely as before, driving the same car, buying the same products, and disposing of waste in the same way. This gap between awareness and action is not simply a matter of hypocrisy. It reflects something deeper: the extraordinary difficulty of responding meaningfully to a crisis that is simultaneously everywhere and, in the rhythms of daily life, largely invisible. Environmental pollution today operates across multiple dimensions, each serious in its own right and all of them interconnected. Air pollution, driven primarily by the burning of fossil fuels and industrial emissions, is responsible for millions of premature deaths every year, a figure that consistently shocks when stated plainly, yet somehow fails to generate the kind of sustained public outrage one might expect. The air above many of the world's major cities remains dangerously contaminated, and the populations most exposed to its effects are, almost without exception, those with the least political and economic power to do anything about it. Water pollution tells a similarly troubling story. Rivers, lakes, and oceans have long served as convenient disposal sites for agricultural runoff, industrial waste, and plastic debris, and the consequences are now impossible to ignore. Marine ecosystems that took millions of years to develop are being destabilized within the space of a few decades. Microplastics have been detected in the most remote corners of the planet, in Arctic ice, in deep-sea sediments, and in the bloodstreams of human beings. The scale of contamination is such that there is no longer any meaningful distinction between the natural world and the waste products of human civilization. Soil degradation, though it receives considerably less attention than air or water pollution, represents an equally serious threat. Intensive agricultural practices, the overuse of chemical pesticides and fertilizers, and the careless disposal of industrial byproducts have stripped vast areas of land of their fertility and biological diversity. In a world where the global population continues to grow and the demand for food shows no sign of diminishing, the long-term consequences of losing productive agricultural land are difficult to overstate. What makes the pollution crisis particularly difficult to address is the nature of its causes. It is not the product of deliberate malice but of countless individual and institutional decisions, each of which appears reasonable in isolation and collectively produces a disaster. A factory that discharges waste into a river is responding to economic incentives that make proper disposal prohibitively expensive. A consumer who purchases cheaply made, disposable goods is making a rational choice within a system that externalizes environmental costs onto the public. A government that prioritizes short-term economic growth over environmental regulation is responding to political pressures that are entirely real. The problem is systemic, and systemic problems resist the kinds of individual solutions that are most commonly proposed. This is not to suggest that individual behavior is irrelevant, it is not. But the emphasis placed on personal responsibility in public discourse about pollution has at times served to deflect attention from the structural changes that are genuinely necessary. Recycling household waste and carrying reusable shopping bags are worthwhile habits, but they operate at an entirely different scale from the regulatory overhaul, industrial transformation, and international cooperation that the situation actually demands. Placing the burden of solution primarily on individual consumers risks letting the most powerful actors in the system, governments, corporations, and financial institutions, off the hook far too easily. There are, nonetheless, grounds for cautious optimism. Renewable energy has become economically competitive with fossil fuels in many parts of the world far sooner than most experts predicted. Public awareness of plastic pollution has translated, in a number of countries, into meaningful legislative action. The scientific understanding of pollution and its effects has never been more detailed or more widely accessible. And there is a growing recognition among at least some policymakers that environmental protection and economic development are not the mutually exclusive propositions they were once assumed to be. The challenge, ultimately, is one of political will and institutional courage. The knowledge exists. The technologies, in many cases, already exist. What remains is the harder task of building the social and political consensus necessary to deploy them at the scale and speed the situation requires. A planet under pressure cannot afford to wait indefinitely for that consensus to emerge on its own.